Hey, welcome everybody back to another episode of Draft on Tap. This is season 2, episode 5, and our guest today is Derrik Klassen. Derrik, I tried this. I hope I got it right. I figured there was two ways to go: Klassen or Clausen.
It
Did
is
I miss on
Klassen.
both? It is Klassen.
No, it is Klassen. Yeah, that well done.
Thank you, Robert. I should not care so much about that, but indeed I do. Uh, Derrik, a busy man over at the Football 33rd, also worked for Bleacher and Perception Reception. First time on the show, we're always curious to get to know folk a little bit. Tell us how you got started in the industry.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of started a really long time ago. I'm 26 now, but I started writing in like the sophomore year of high school. So at that point, that was like 10, 11 years ago. And it was kind of just a thing where I had quit playing sports. I played soccer at the time, but I had quit playing sports, and I was like, well, I should probably do something productive. And I always loved football, so I just kind of started writing about it and watching draft prospects for fun and for free. And then maybe a year or two after that, I realized people would pay me money to do that. And then just kind of as it went on, people paid me more money to do that. And so that's kind of just how I fell into it. It was kind of almost an accident, really.
You do the podcast now. Do you prefer writing to podcasting?
It kind of depends like on the writing work. Like if I get to really do like some nitty gritty like film room type of stuff, I actually do prefer writing in that sense. But if I'm kind of just like giving takes on stuff or like, going into trades or whatever, that type of deal, I think podcasts are a little bit easier, more free flowing, kind of lets you get all of the stuff out of your brain that can sometimes be hard when you're trying to write.
You do the draft for Bleacher Report, and you do NFL for the 33rd. Do you prefer college to the NFL or vice versa?
I actually prefer the NFL, definitely. And really, I only kind of enjoy college football through the lens of the NFL. Like, I don't really watch all that much. Like, I don't get all that excited for like bowl games or like random G5 games or whatever that is. Like, when I tune into a college football game, I'm like, all right, who's the third round receiver here that is important, like that type of deal. So I definitely prefer the NFL game to the college game.
All right, you didn't make any news at all this week when you dropped your offseason quarterback rankings. We planned on doing some draft, but we cannot not talk about this thing here. Let's see if I can get it pulled up properly. There it is. Yeah, it's a little hard to see here. That's okay. When you started making the rankings here, what was the outlook? How did you kind of go about it?
I mean, you kind of have to weigh a little bit of what did the player do this year, and also like kind of trying to project a little bit like what might happen next year. That's why players like Stroud are kind of tough, because obviously he was fantastic this year, but he's just not nearly as experienced as a lot of the other guys. So you're trying to project a little bit how things are going to go. Anthony Richardson is another case like that, where it's like he looked really good for 3 games for a rookie, but he only played 3 games, and you don't know how he's going to come back from injury. So guys like him were tough to rank. Aaron Rodgers, for kind of the same reason. He played well in 2022 relatively, but then he didn't play at all this last year, and he's going to be a 40-year-old coming off of an Achilles. So you're really trying to just weigh what we know about the quarterback most recently, along with trying to project what's going forward. And then really a lot of like my ideology with how I rank quarterbacks is like, how many different ways can a guy beat you? That's why I value Lamar Jackson as much as I do. That's why I value Stafford even as much as I do. And he doesn't have like the mobility and stuff like that, but all of the different ways that he can beat you as a passer, whether it's underneath, over the middle, down the field, outside the numbers, yada, yada, yada. He's so unbelievably good at beating you in all different ways from the pocket that I just value that over some other quarterbacks who I think are a little bit more limited in the ways that they can beat you.
I would imagine that the big pushback you're getting, particularly on the top 5, is Herbert and the "what have you done for me lately." What is it about Herbert that gets him into that top 5, other than hype from college? Because I think a lot of people think he's still living off that.
I mean, I just think when you watch him play, he's one of the best put together pocket passers in the league. I think the way that he handles pre-snap is not quite as good as some of the elite guys. Like, even Stafford is probably better in that regard. Mahomes is better in that regard. Dak, I think, is probably a little bit better in that regard. But I think he's a really, really sound decision maker, and you can understand the process of how he's trying to play the position, no matter what concept is called. Like, I never really watch Herbert make a decision and go, I don't know why he did that. Whereas, like, even for as much as I love like Trevor Lawrence, there are like 3 plays a game where I'm like, I wonder why he did that, and it doesn't really make sense. Herbert to me is like almost robotic in the way that he plays the position, and I think he does it at a really high level. And then I think physically there just aren't that many guys who are like him, whether it's athletically, moving in and around the pocket, moving out of the pocket. When he wants to become a runner, he is really threatening, even though he doesn't do it all that much. And then arm talent wise, the ball just screams off of his hand in a way that really only like Stafford, Mahomes, and Allen can probably match. Like, everybody else is probably in a different tier from those guys. So I just think he kind of has a really impressive blend of the way that he plays his position and then just physically some of the stuff he can get away with. Obviously, it has not yet amounted to many wins in Los Angeles, but I have a lot of faith that Jim Harbaugh is going to be able to turn that around and kind of unlock everything that I think myself and some others have really seen with Herbert.
Well, if Harbaugh can't do it, right, then it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, if Harbaugh can't do it, then it's concerning. Yeah.
Adam, do you see anything in the top 10 here that kind of sticks out to
you? Not really, honestly. It's pretty on point. I was going to ask him, as far as Fields, you have him at 21. I think it'd be naive to think that Chicago is not going to take Caleb Williams and they're not going to trade him. So where does he go, and does he make an impact?
I would love to see him in Pittsburgh, actually, because I wanted him in Atlanta when Arthur Smith was still there. Obviously, Arthur Smith is now fired and in Pittsburgh. I just think he makes so much sense for the way they want to do stuff, like, run the ball a lot, be under center, play action. When you get into the gun, you can incorporate a lot of the zone read pistol stuff that Arthur Smith was doing with Mariota early on in Atlanta. So I think he's kind of just like a uber talented version of some of the stuff that Arthur Smith has already been trying to do. I still think you're going to have struggles with him triggering over the middle of the field into tight windows, playing as timely as you would like. But I just think physically he kind of has everything that you want from a quarterback. And I think in terms of the way you want to build the offense, he kind of just makes sense for what Smith already wants to do. So,
right.
The other one that I think people will be curious about is Burrow at 9. This is an injury thing. What is it about Burrow that's got him a little bit lower on this list than I think a lot of people would have expected?
It's a little bit of an injury thing because obviously he probably played like 3 games this year where he felt like himself. So we just didn't get to see a lot of it. I have also generally been slightly lower on Burrow. I think he's fantastic. And I think there's, no matter how you shape it, he's a top 10 quarterback. And if people put him as high as like 5th, I wouldn't have any issue with it. It's just, for me, when I watch Burrow within structure, what I talked about earlier with being able to beat you in all different types of ways, I think there are certain areas where Burrow just doesn't quite have that. Like, this is an offense that, because of Burrow, they almost never get under center to throw the ball. He doesn't want to like take these deep drops where he's turning his back to the defense, having to make these really difficult tight window throws over the middle of the field, all of this play action stuff. That's just not how he operates. And so I think that limits the offense a little bit. And then, like, generally, even on some of their drop back stuff from the gun, he's just not a quarterback who will throw into tight windows over the middle a lot. He can do it, and it's not like it's completely devoid from his game. I just think that some of the other quarterbacks up in this tier do it a lot better than he does. So it feels very nitpicky, but for me, that's just stuff that matters. And what I will say is the offense did try to incorporate more under center stuff and go play action more a little bit this year. It's just that because he was hurt, he couldn't actually do it outside of like those 2-3 games. So I do think next year it's entirely possible he could take that step, and I would end up putting him back up at 5, 6, whatever it is, if he can prove that type of stuff to me. Because right now he feels. You remember like 2014 Ben Roethlisberger, where he just played exclusively from the gun and he was just ripping it? Like, it feels a little bit like that, where it's obviously good, but there's something missing a little bit still, and it's a little bit incomplete.
What about Russell Wilson? I'll stick with another quarterback's not going to be on the team listed here. To me, I think we kind of know what we got in Fields, but Russell Wilson, you have a player that's obviously on a decline. Where does he go? And what team gives him the second chance? Does he get a second chance to be a starter?
I honestly don't know at this point because of the contract situation. I think if he was making significantly less money, it would not be a problem, and he probably could get a starting job. But I think at this point, we've seen 2 years of pretty mediocre play, and even before that in Seattle, he was a little bit of on a downturn. The part that complicates everything with Russell Wilson to me is that Sean Payton just clearly didn't like him, as an idea at quarterback. He just. Everything you ascribe to a Sean Payton quarterback, Russell Wilson is the opposite of all of those things. So it's yeah, of course Russell Wilson didn't look that good in this offense. This was a marriage that never really was going to make sense. So I do think it's kind of hard to find a home for him right now. But at the same time, I could still see him bouncing back a little bit just because this situation with him in Denver with Sean Payton was just never going to make a whole lot of sense for him.
Denver cut him, right?
Yeah.
Has he been cut yet? So
I don't know if he's been cut yet, but it's
not official. It's the June release date.
But they have to wait.
When they wait and release him, though, I think that the contract voids out there, right?
I guess that's true. Yeah.
Paid, so technically, he could go to Atlanta and play for the vet minimum,
right,
or whatever it is. And I think that could be attractive to some teams if you can get him in. Hungry Wilson for next to no money might be interesting.
Atlanta makes a lot of sense.
Atlanta would make sense.
Where I see him ending up. If to your point, if he ends up somewhere, I'm sure he'll end up somewhere if he wants to be. But a guy like Russell Wilson is probably tough to get to come off the bench. At 17, you have Fields, Hurts. I'm curious where you had him when the season started. How much did that end of the season drop kind of affected where you had him? Because I feel like he was a top 10 guy before the season started.
I think going in, I had him 8th to 9th, 10th, somewhere in that bottom end of the top 10, like you're saying. But he was always a quarterback where I had certain reservations coming into the season. And that's why, some people coming into the season had him as high as 3, 4, 5, all that sort of stuff. He kind of almost had the Burrow thing where he just doesn't throw the middle of the field that well. And I think it's a lot more pronounced than Burrow. Burrow gets it done at an NFL level. Hurts, I think, really, really struggles to trigger over the middle of the field and read out full drop back concepts. I think his pocket management has always been kind of iffy. It's just that when you're playing behind the best offensive line in the NFL, doesn't matter a whole lot. You can kind of get away with not having that. Yeah, it helps. And then this year, I think specifically, we saw that when he doesn't have his legs the same way, he's just not the same quarterback. This year, he was dealing with knee issues kind of from the jump this season. And then he kind of was dealing with other issues throughout the course of the year. And I think we saw when he was, only 70% of the runner he can be, there was a cascading effect on the rest of his game. And I think that to me was a little bit concerning. It's obviously entirely possible he just comes back healthy next year and none of this matters and he looks amazing again. It's just, I think with some of the ways that he's limited as a passer and then me having some questions about how healthy he's going to come back as a runner, he just gave me a little bit of pause.
It's going to be interesting. At 10, you have Jordan Love, which I think is interesting because I think that the league is higher on Jordan than the casual NFL fan is. And he's getting ready to get paid. What have you seen from Jordan? To me, this 10 feels more like a projection, but I'm not as mad as you probably took some heat for this Jordan Love at 10.
There definitely were some people who were not very happy with it. What I'll say about Love is, so first of all, I'll just talk about his skill set. When you watch him, he has a lot of the arm elasticity, incredible arm talent, functional mobility that Mahomes has, Aaron Rodgers has, Josh Allen. Josh Allen is the peak of that, but it's kind of, he has a lot of the same stuff. And I think when you look at all of the elite quarterbacks in the league, all of them have that to some degree. And so the fact that he kind of checks all of those boxes to me is okay, if he gets a little bit better at a lot of stuff, he can really be one of these guys who are a true difference maker. And then I think what really impresses me with Jordan Love is he very, very obviously got better over the course of this year.
Yes.
For the first 3 months of the season, him and all of his young skill players, because you got to remember all those guys were first and second year players. they just could not put one foot in front of the other for a lot of this season. Like there would be one play where like, you know, maybe Love and his receiver don't agree on where a stick route is supposed to end up, or, you know, somebody runs a route that bends more than he thinks it's going to, so he ends up wide. Then there's another play, you know, 2 drives later where Jordan Love just straight up misses. And it's like, man, these guys cannot put it together. But then you saw by the end of, you know, in December into January, Love was, I think, becoming more accurate. He was throwing on time more consistently. He was finding more unique ways to get the ball out within the pocket, which I thought was really impressive. Like the first 2 or 3 months of the season, he kind of felt almost robotic in the way that he was like moving in the pocket and trying to get to certain throws. But I think you saw by the end of the year, when he had gotten enough reps, he was like kind of feeling himself and like finding these different arm angles and stuff like that. And it was like, okay, this is a guy who clearly is getting confident in playing the position. And when you add that type of confidence and this like growth curve onto a guy who has some of the physical talents he has, it's just like, you're right. This is a little bit of projection, but this is a dude I absolutely want to buy in on for those reasons.
For Love, he is what that had been one of those deals where when he gets drafted by the Packers, he's frustrated and extremely happy at the same time. Because the Packers just have a history of if we can sit you for a couple of years, we'll coach you up the way we like you, and the rest has proven to be history. What is the deal with Daniel Jones? Do you think they'll have to reset? This is a guy that, I mean, the Giants can't continue on with him, can they?
Nah, I don't think so. He's such a weird quarterback because I thought it never made any sense to pay him $40 million. Like when you watch the way that they put together the offense last year, where everything is off of boot action, everything is a throw into the flats, like everything that, you know, is in their shotgun passing game is all RPOs. Like it was a very simplified offense. He looked productive, sure, but like that was all he could do. That's just not a quarterback you pay $40 million to. It just doesn't make any sense. Like if you're going to pay a guy $40 million, he needs to be a guy who can, you know, put on the big boy pants and like really make some plays out there. And that's just not who Daniel Jones is. At the same time, the fact that there is a clear structure for him to be productive, especially when you incorporate his legs into it. He's a really good runner. It's like, okay, this is a guy who is a starting quarterback. It's just that he's not a $40 million starting quarterback. That's why I have him at 23, where he's in this range where it's like, he's not the worst guy you can start, but he's probably not going to be making a difference for you. So I don't know what they're going to do with him this year. I think they probably try to draft a quarterback if they can, or sign somebody else. Signing somebody is probably not going to make any sense with how much money they're allotting to Jones, but I would be shocked if he's starting for them this year. But I think over the next 2 or 3 years, he's going to end up with another job somewhere else.
People like the size and the speed.
Yeah.
I was expecting more when he came out of Duke, quite frankly, and I thought he was going to be better in the league. But again, it's interesting. All these things are where you go and how the system works. I mean, people talk about Mahomes all the time, and I always say Mahomes wasn't exactly Mahomes before he got to Kansas City. And think of all the things that Reed did to kind of switch that offense to do what, you know, not quite an air raid, but not quite the West Coast either, kind of meshed them together for what Patrick does well. And if more teams would do that, then you'd find better quarterback play all through. Adam, I was looking, one of the things I noticed on this list as we're going through it is, and you had mentioned earlier about, you know, the Bears drafting Caleb Williams. Look at the quarterbacks in the division. I think you have to. I mean, I was kind of surprised by that, right? I mean, assuming that Cousins goes back for at least a year or two, and Goff, I think, is criminally underrated. I think you got to upgrade from Fields.
Yeah, I could say, come on, like it's a good story. He played well towards the end of the season, but he's still limited. And it's like, exactly, if you're really going to try to make a run and hang in that division, you either got to go free agency or the draft. They're not going to get anyone free agency that's going to be a difference maker. And, you know, how do you pass on Caleb Williams at this point? Like everything you're hearing, it's going to be that Godfather offer. And what does that really mean? That means, other than the swap of the first, 3 firsts, probably 2 seconds in back-to-back drafts. So that's the Godfather offer that they would probably only consider, because, you know, that can change a roster for you. But if they truly want to compete in the short term, yeah, they're going to go with him. And that's why I think with Washington, you know, that was the next thing I was going to ask. You know, you've either got Team A or Team Daniels. And I think with Washington and even New England after that, I think you see quarterback 1, 2, 3. But I think the Bears, they're going to set the stage with Caleb Williams. I don't think there's any reason or any way they get out of that pick.
let's switch gears a little bit, Derek, and talk about some of their quarterbacks coming up in the draft. This one, I think, there's a lot of pick your poison type quarterbacks in this draft, right? I mean, Caleb Williams, I think, is probably getting, like the scouting fatigue on him. But I think there's a lot of people around the league that think after we get to the combine that Jane Daniels will have a real chance to get up to that number one quarterback spot. And again, you hear, things coming out about McCarthy the same way. I mean, Harbaugh, all the way back to Andrew Luck, I think, runs the ball 75% of the time. So it's a hard evaluation. And he's only going to be 20, just turned 21 like a couple of weeks ago. So, Derek, I'm kind of curious, have you sorted out? I know we're still a ways away from the draft, but how have you kind of sorted these things out so far?
Yeah, I think at the top with those top four guys, there's kind of two tiers, and within them, I can kind of go either way. Like I've flip flopped on Caleb and May for a lot of the process. Like I came into the year, Caleb quarterback 1, May like just behind him. Then the kind of like early mid part of this season, I was like, Caleb's not playing his best ball. Like May clearly looks a little bit more like some of the other NFL quarterbacks at the top of the league, just in terms of size and athletic ability and all that stuff. And then as I've gone through and charted both of them, I kind of am coming back a little bit to Caleb, which I think all of that just speaks to the fact that, like, I think if you end up with both of these guys at 1 or 2, you're very happy. Like they both, I think, have a lot of merit to them. Caleb is obviously a little bit more creative, does a little bit more stuff outside of the pocket. I think May, his best moments in structure and down the field, I think, are a little bit more impressive. But for the most part, I think either of these guys, if you land on them, you're going to be pretty happy. Daniels and McCarthy are really interesting because I think they're both more flawed prospects and they're very, very different prospects. Daniels, obviously much older. He's like, I think it'd be 23, 24. He's played for 5 seasons. He's played a lot of football, but he's an incredible athlete who has thrown really well down the field. So like those two things alone, you go, okay, we can get explosive offense out of this guy. To me, it's just how much are you going to be able to fill in the down to down stuff with him? Because I think as a processor, he can be pretty inconsistent, especially when he's looking over the middle of the field. I think there are just times where I don't understand why he's turning down certain throws. And I think that gives me a little bit of pause for a guy who's played a lot of football. Like if he was a guy who was 1 or 2 year starter, 21 years old and had that issue, it could be like, you know what? Maybe with more reps, he figures this out. But Daniels has played a lot of football. And so that kind of concerns me. It was the same issue I had with Kenny Pickett coming out of Pitt, where he had a lot of the same, like, man, you've played a lot of football and I don't know why you're turning down these throws. Like right. He kind of has a little bit of that to him. At least Daniels, to his credit, is a lot more talented than that. So it kind of evens it out a little bit. McCarthy is fascinating because, to your point, the volume thing where he's just not throwing a lot does make it a little bit of a tricky evaluation. And when he is throwing, it's a lot of like, they're kind of in favorable game scripts all the time, just because like the defense is amazing. They're running the ball consistently. Like it's just a very cushy job to be in. But then you watch some of the throws he makes over the middle into tight windows. You watch some of the throws that he makes on the run. You watch some of the stuff that he's able to do in the pocket. I think for a young player, he actually has some pretty good pocket movement. And you're like, man, if this guy can do some of that already, like you can see the flashes and he's only 20 years old. Like, what could this look like in 3 years? So I think he's kind of fascinating in that sense. I still think he's flawed in some of like, I don't think he throws that well outside the numbers. I think sometimes if you manipulate the coverages on him, he can get a little bit antsy and he can like not really know what's going on. I think especially when you get into some really interesting cover 2 looks, he just like loses his mind, which was kind of probably my biggest issue with him. But I think there's reason to be excited about all of these guys for different reasons. But those are kind of the 2 tiers I have.
Well, we've had a couple evaluators, and some of them surprised us, throwing Bo Nix like up there with the top 3.
Oh no!
Obviously, is he? Not me either. Is he in that tier with McCarthy and Daniels, or you have him on the next tier?
But real quick, Derek, for you, it is fascinating because, to Adam's point, this is episode 5, and every Wednesday somebody's talked to us about Bo Nix. And if you saw Lance Zierlein's post today, I mean, the advanced metrics are really in favor of Bo Nix by like a wide margin over a lot of these guys. It's kind of crazy.
He's another tricky one, almost in the Daniels like aspect where it's like
played a lot of football.
He's played a lot of football, man, and I still have concerns about how he actually plays football. Like his his footwork to me is really shoddy, especially like during his drop back, which, to be fair, that stuff is a lot easier to fix to me, like your drop back footwork, because you can just get with a good coach for 1 or 2 years and it's like, okay, we're going to figure out how to dial this in. So that part could get fixed. But I also think some of the ways he handles pressure in the pocket can be a little bit iffy. I think some of the decisions he makes outside the pocket can look fantastic. Some of them are also completely mind blowing. Like the old Auburn Bo Nix is still in there somewhere.
I refuse to believe that Auburn Bo Nix is gone.
Right. It's there somewhere. It's there somewhere. Oregon just did a better job of hiding it. So I think that's kind of the concern to me. It is just that I think a lot more of his, quote, development at Oregon was less him getting better as a player. It was kind of just Oregon found ways to dial in on what he was good at and really hide what he was bad at, which that's awesome. Good for them. Great. It's just, I don't think it really fixes him as a prospect.
I think exactly when you evaluate that tape, you have to, me and Doug were saying a couple of weeks ago, you have to go into that knowing that, is he a system guy? Are they tailoring it? And how does that transition? But 100% agree.
How many teams do you think will have Penix completely off their board?
Another one.
Probably a lot. And truthfully, I would. Like, I still have to evaluate, with Bleacher Report, I still have to evaluate these guys like on the idea that everybody is draftable, and like I have to kind of do it that way. But like if I was running a team, Penix would probably not be on my board, because you just look at a guy who's going to be 24 years old, multiple knee injuries, a shoulder injury that like ruined his season. That's just a lot. It's a really scary place to be in.
And he's not mobile.
Exactly. Like he's just not a guy who moves around. Like, especially like, it's not even just that like physically he's not all that mobile. He just like play style wise does not want to move. He's like a revolutionary cannon in the pocket. And Washington did really well to unlock that, but like that's kind of just the way that he plays. And then the other thing with even just besides all of that, I think that his ability to play in condensed pockets and under pressure is really, really rough. Just because, one, I think the biggest issue is he's not actually that short of a quarterback. He's like 6'3", which is totally fine. It's just that when he throws the ball, he like drops his hips and has a really like low throwing motion. So he kind of makes himself a short quarterback just by the way that he throws. And that to me, I think is a lot of why he struggles to throw under pressure. So you add in some of the pressure stuff, and then on top of like all his injury and age concerns, and it's just like, at some point, obviously I would draft him, but it wouldn't be anywhere close to where he's actually going to end up going. So like functionally, I probably wouldn't have him on my board.
Let's do a couple of these before we get out of here. If you were before the draft, all the way to the draft, we're going to get nothing but Chicago. Keep Fields, build around him with all the picks and the offense you could build that way, or you just can't afford to miss out on what may be the next Mahomes. Where do you stand on that?
It's tough because emotionally, I really loved Fields as a prospect. I thought he was awesome, and I defended him a lot early in his Chicago tenure. At a certain point, it's gotten to like, you kind of just are what you are at this point. It's almost in the Daniel Jones tier where it's like, you can get productive offense out of this. It's just kind of limited in the ways that you're doing it. And I think because they've seen enough of him at this point, it's like, you probably can't continue to invest in that, even if he did show some better play at the end of the season. I think when you end up in a spot where you can, just reset your quarterback contract structure and get a young guy, I think that's helpful. But then two, when you get an option like this where you can go with either Caleb or May, who are just phenomenal prospects in their own right, you kind of just have to do it. Like, even if you think there is some merit to building around Fields, like it's really hard to pass up on an opportunity to reset with a quarterback prospect of this caliber. So I think Fields is going to start somewhere. I think he could still turn up and end up being good at some point, but you kind of just have to pull the trigger on one of these quarterbacks, I think.
And then finally, what do you think, and what would you do if you were the Commanders at 2?
I'm assuming that Caleb goes first overall, which does seem like that's probably going to be the case here. I would take Drake May. I think both of these guys, if you flipped them at 1 or 2, I wouldn't care either way. I think they're both phenomenal prospects. And I think that him falling, quote, to 2, perfectly happy with that.
I lied. One last one. Where did you have Sam Howell at last year?
I had Sam Howell as like a third, fourth round pick. I thought he was basically as good. I thought the funny thing is that so obviously that's a little bit higher than where he got drafted, but I was like way lower on Kenny Pickett. So I thought him and Pickett were like comparable prospects in like the third, fourth round, where it's like they could be spot starter, maybe 10% chance of them being a decent starter, but probably just going to be guys who are a little bit project-y and like good backup types, which I think functionally that's kind of what they both are at this point.
Yeah. Derek, this was great, man. I had a blast talking about quarterbacks with you. What do you got coming up next now that the off season's in full swing?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. This was a blast. I would be down to do this another time for sure. So I have, obviously at Bleacher Report, we still have all of our draft stuff through the end of the draft. I do offensive skill players, but we have 3 other guys on the staff who cover everything else. I think they do a fantastic job. So definitely go check that out. And then over at Reception Perception, I will be charting all of the quarterbacks in this class. Well, not all of them. There could be like 30, but I'll probably chart about 8 to 10 that will be interested. Most of the guys who we expect to get drafted. So I'll have that coming up in the next couple months.
That's with Harmon's group, right?
Yes, with Matt Harmon.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, great. All right, buddy. We appreciate it.
Thanks,
Adam, we'll see you next week.
have a good one, guys.
Thanks, fellas.